to the front. Thank you.
Instead of talking, act. Stop poisoning us.
Yeah, here.
Thank you. Can we just...
Shame on you. Shame on you.
Thank
Shame on
you. Can we just have a little bit of respect for our next speakers? Thank you.
Stop poisoning us.
Tricia and Tony, welcome. And the time is yours because there's two of you. You've got 10 minutes between you and then we'll have time for questions. Thank you.
It strikes me that respect is earned, respect should be earned. Now it's time for change.
Thank you.
And I really appreciate if you stop poisoning our children. It's
Thank
a
you.
vital issue and it requires a resolution now. If you don't do it, you have no respect from anybody.
Here, here.
We hear you. Tony, the floor is yours.
Thank you for allowing me to speak today in regards of the planned 2018 Hunua 1080 drop. I'm a bordering landowner and a long-time park user, tramper, mountain biker and permitted hunter. I have read the Project Hunua post-operation report thoroughly, and I noticed the almost complete omission of any data about unintended bykill, of which there was plenty that I was aware of. One dog, Lulu, tested positive for 1080 poisoning. She died on the property I now own. I'm also a dog owner, so you can see my concern. There were 3 others that I know of which were not tested that suffered the same fate. The tomtit, robin and grey warbler kill was obvious to anyone entering the park post-drop, but that was not reported. Tomtits have been known and shown to take 3 years to recover to pre-drop numbers. They were reported killed after the 1997 Hunua 1080 drop. None in 2015. Doesn't sound right to me. I was told also by a reliable inside source that several tui were found killed in one part of the park. That was not in the report. There was a considerable kaka kill at the northern end of the park. Kaka were often seen flying between the park and Aorere Beach Village until the 2015 1080 drop. You can ask any local, none have been seen since in the village area. And of course, that's not in the report. There was a considerable kill of moorpork, which is not surprising as they prey on the mice and rats and are susceptible to secondary poisoning. Wild pig numbers took a big hit. As a permitted hunter, that was very obvious to me, and that wasn't in the report. In an email from Claire Sarney, the Hunua project manager, dated 1st December 2015, in reply to my question about dead bird recovery, she states, and I quote, "During the track clearing process, a small number of introduced bird species were observed, namely 2 magpies and a small number of chaffinch." Well, that's not in the report. She also said, and I quote, "With respect to your question about the recovery of dead birds following the operation, no specific program of dead animal recovery was carried out other than to collect the possum carcasses for decomposition monitoring that we were carrying out." So if no specific program of dead animal recovery was carried out, what was in the multiple sacks being loaded into cars by track clearing staff working to clear tracks in the private pine block on the Kawakawa Aorere Road? That was also 1080. Pine cones, maybe?
Hardly.
Why is all this unintended bykill data missing from the report? I would suggest, ladies and gentlemen, that the Project Hunua post-operation report is nothing but a feel-good piece of PR, listing all the perceived positives and ignoring all the not-so-politically acceptable side effects of using a cruel and inhumane, broad-spectrum, ecosystem-altering poison in a manner that the manufacturer expressly advises against, and that is aerial application and application into water supplies. Might I also suggest that the report was written with the knowledge and intent to redose the forest within 2 or 3 years, regardless of the effectiveness or safety of the 2015 drop. And of course, the Department of Conservation would know they would have to poison again within 3 years because studies by Innes et al. in 1995 and Powelsland et al. In 1999 both showed that rat numbers quickly bounced back to densities greater than prior to a 1080 drop. So yes, the tracking results that are now showing an increase in rat numbers have been caused by the 2015 1080 operation. I haven't got time here today to talk about the effects on birds by sublethal 1080 doses and the associated poor breeding success, something that is very understudied, and the woeful inadequate testing of drinking water supplies, only to parts per billion when 1080 is implicated as being a significant risk at parts per trillion. Nor do I have time to address the anomalies around the financial reporting in the post-operation report. Finally, in a DOC survey online last year, 62% of respondents did not want the continued use of 1080. Government agencies and councils should listen to those that elect them to office. Ladies and gentlemen, I ask that the Environment and Community Committee does not endorse the proposed 2018 Pest Management Program for Kahukaunui.
Thank you. We'll just hear from Tricia, Councillor Casey, and then you're the first question.
Right.
Tricia.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, I only heard about this item on Friday, and I've therefore not been able to forward the material I would really like this committee to consider in this debate. But I have to add to all that's been said about Roundup applies even more so to 1080. For those of you who may not be aware, I've been coordinator for Friends of Sherwood since 1990, because in 1987 I started setting up my practice in homeopathy, and I found the same people coming to me with the same symptoms every time the council sprayed. So since that time we spent an awful lot of time getting our local neighbourhood as free as possible of toxic chemicals, and had to fight that through to the amalgamation, and you've heard the results today. It's tragic, and such a lot of unnecessary pain and suffering gone down that needn't have. So we don't have that same volume of information about 1080 because New Zealand is unfortunately the only country mad enough to drop it from the air, although I do believe we're convincing Australia and other countries now to follow suit. We use 90% of the total world production, and I'd just like to say today that you actually have a wonderful opportunity with glyphosate and the weed policy, as well as the proposal to drop 1080 on the Hanuas again, because you'll have two chances to stand up for our children and future generations who are facing unprecedented increases in chronic diseases such as cancer, obesity, diabetes, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, etc. So you have that opportunity, and I hope you grasp it with both hands to show that you do care about future generations. Both these products were originally Monsanto's, although the 1080 factory in Alabama is no longer their operation after they sold it to Toll Chemicals and scooted, leaving the local river contaminated with PCBs. What we're talking about in item 11, of course, is the monofluoride acetate or 1080 poison, and Animal Control Products' last review of their safety data sheet revised on the 15th of March 2016. That's after the last Hanua drop. It states quite clearly, and I'm quite happy to table a copy of that for you, that the hazard identifiers, the priority identifiers, danger, deadly poison, keep out of reach of children, it's ecotoxic. And one of the things I want to stress today is that the secondary identifiers, acutely toxic, may be fatal if swallowed, inhaled or absorbed through the skin. Repeated oral exposure may cause reproductive or developmental damage. So you've got to take measures to reduce the risk of non-target animals being exposed to the toxin either through eating baits or by scavenging. I think I better put my glasses on. Oops. There. That's a bit better. Harmful to aquatic organisms. Manage bait application rates carefully and comply with any restrictions imposed on placing baits over or near waterways. Avoid pollution of any water supply with pellets or used containers. deadly poison subject to tracking requirements for individual packs, available for purchase and use only by holders of controlled substances licences. And here we are, dropping it from the air quite indiscriminately over vast tracts of our forest. And in the Hanuas, there's absolutely no excuse. It's not a difficult terrain. And hunting, the Kokoko program was going quite well, thank you very much, before the drop in 2018 with the recovery of the Kokoko in the Hanuas. One of the things it says here is that pellets will eventually lose their form and disintegrate if immersed in water for several hours or more. That's totally contradicted by videos from the Graff brothers and others who show pellets still in water at least several days afterwards. And one of the most distressing things is sodium fluoroacetate may be present for many months in the carcasses of poisoned animals, thus presenting a secondary poisoning danger to carnivorous birds and mammals. Where practicable, the exposed bodies of all poison animals should be collected and destroyed, and I really feel that that's treated very lightly in the drops that this council have undertaken. That data sheet should actually end any thought of aerial drops. That, of course, if Mr Peters keeps his promise, once he decides who should govern the country for the next 3 years, 1080 drops will be stopped. So at the very least, this item should be shelved until after that decision is made. His policy is for an eco-fur industry in its place, and that means jobs, people on the ground instead of poison in the air. It makes total sense, and why hasn't that happened? There's no active pursuit of other methods in this report that I can see, and I'd also like to table the information compiled by Whiting O'Keefe, who suggests the reasons why. I've also got a report here by Dr. Peter Scanlon. Now, both of these people are highly qualified in their field, and the importance of their reports is that it's not from industry, it's not from other vested interests. They have compiled these reports out of concern for their families, their whānau, the people that they are concerned about, the wildlife and the future generations. And therefore I think it's important to place more emphasis on what they have to say than the industry-driven reports that are fueling this madness of 1080.
Yep.
Just about time to wrap up, Tricia, if you can
Okay.
bring it together.
Well, I unfortunately won't be able to go through all of the importance of the O'Keefe writing out. The comparisons of cost, just like with glyphosate and mechanical means, the comparisons of costs of using 1080, aerial 1080 compared to ground control are totally out of kilter with reality. The one from Peter Scanlon is talking about those subtle effects that are not being investigated, and it's really up to industry to prove that this substance is safe in parts per trillion. We're talking about the epigenetic effects, we're talking about the mitochondrial DNA that is passed down through the mother. The sperm actually sheds that, so you're not actually getting it through the father, but this is genetic defects and illnesses passed on to up to 4 generations at least through the mother. And so his concern is really about how, for instance, what brought it to his attention was a Maori woman who was pregnant and eating vast amounts of watercress after a 1080 drop, and the effects that had on her children, and will no doubt continue on to her children's children and her children's children's children. So I just, to wrap it up, would say that it's indefensible. The use of 1080 is indefensible because of the torture, the pain and suffering it inflicts on the animals, number one. It's indefensible because of the trauma and all that collateral damage that's not accounted for in these deficient reports. Luli's family, that was 3 small children who woke to 2:30 in the morning to their dog demented and howling in pain and terror. Those children will have that for the rest of their life. They will have that experience imprinted firmly. And that's the sort of saying. Direct effects, water testing is inadequate, but the more subtle effects that Dr. Scanlon has elucidated in his report are even more comprehensive and disturbing. So in light of this, I think it would appear cavalier to say that this committee even entertained the notion to endorse this proposal for yet another drop on the
Thank you.
horse.
Thanks, Tricia. Now, Councillor Casey, you had signalled a question.
Yeah, it was just to let you know that we had a workshop with staff on this report earlier, and I did raise the issues of unintended bykill and the death of your dog. I'm concerned at your observations of unintended bykill and your statement that 3 other dogs were dead but not tested. So I will be raising that if you wait for the staff when they come. But I do want to hear about the death of your dog. I want to know how it happened. If you can spare me 1 minute to let me know how come your dog is dead.
It wasn't actually my dog. It was the previous owner of the property that I've moved on to earlier this year. It was from a scavenging a possum carcass from the Wairoa stream, which runs around the edge of our boundary, secondary poisoning from that is what caused the death. And
I just want to say how sorry I am that happened. I don't support 1080.
thank you. Yeah.
Councillor Casey. Okay. Questions? I'll move that we receive your presentation and thank you for it. And do I have a seconder? Councillor Cashmore, I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Can I just table these?
That would be
books through
great.
there?
Yep.
I just
And we can
didn't
make
mention
sure
the one thing there that Kathy White from the Auckland Regional Council applied to Council for the reports on the brodifacoum monitoring. And what concerns me is why are we monitoring brodifacoum and not 1080 in the same way?
We can circulate those, Tricia.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. All right, so we'll move on. And I'd like to welcome Aaron and the Save Te Arai group. Welcome, Aaron, and if you just want to introduce us to the group with you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Councillors. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, the public to speak in a public forum. I have with me here Heather Rogan from the New Zealand Ferry Turn Charitable Trust and Colin Smith, local board member up in Rodney. We'll try and keep this brief. Obviously, thank you. It's a long day for you all. I understand that you're busy people with lots of things on your minds. What we have ahead of you this afternoon is a lot of it is very good. There is an opportunity for the for public consultation finally relating to Te Arai regional parks. The new acquisition 2 years ago of 217 hectares in Te Arai North, incorporating with Te Arai Point, the 50 hectares that has been with the Regional Council in regional parks for a long time. And then obviously in the imminent future is the South Te Arai, which is another 150 hectares of reserve that's obviously still up for debate. Thank you for your phone call, Councillor. I do appreciate that for the heads up. We are in support, Save Te Arai is in support of the fully transparent public consultative process when it comes to a regional park management plan. It's a long time coming. The reserve was vested in December of 2015. We're now getting close to 2 years on. There's been a lot that's gone on in that reserve. Councillors on Saturday received an email communications with myself and Ian Smallburn. So hopefully all the councillors have that. That was emailed directly from myself, well, from Save Te Arai to you on Saturday. And then there's also a submission that was emailed yesterday that hopefully you'll have. Tam has it, I know Penny has it. So I wish that to be tabled, and that's the basis of what we're talking about today. If I have it. It's gone. Oh, here we go, sorry. There's been an awful lot of action up in the reserve. This was all predefined in the Environment Court 2014 ruling that allowed for the vesting of the reserve, and that was in part with a private development and private golf course, Tariti Golf Course, that's adjacent to this area. There's been a long-standing complaint from Save Te Arai, from New Zealand Ferry Turn Charitable Trust, Te Arai Beach Preservation Society, who have members here as well, that there's been a complete lack of public consultation with any of the process and anything that's been affecting the reserve. There will be some resolution to that with the hope of this public consultation process coming up. But there's been an awful lot of things that have gone on in that reserve that should have been subject to public consultation and have not. The Council is required to observe the provisions of the Reserves Act, the Regional Park Management Plan 2010 and the Local Government Act, and since the date of vesting of 18th of December 2015. That means that development within the new reserve should have been reflected in plans subjected to public consultation. That has not occurred. Some instances of that initially was the removal of 58,000 cubic metres of sand from the reserve to be used as private fill in the adjacent private subdivision development. That is the Aotea Square loaded 4 metres deep with sand, the entire of Aotea Square, removed from public reserve with no public consultation, no notification. There was a resource consent, but that was by council staff. Councillors probably don't even know about it. There was a cancellation of a beach car park at the end of a long easement, public easement, and a subsequent reduction of that easement and access, non-notified. That has somewhat been subject to change, but it's still in limbo. There's a cancellation of the Crown access easement and consequential easements to council. The removal of a 30-metre width of a 50-metre wide easement for subject to 270 metres long, for the addition of an extra 5 metres on the balance of this easement is supposedly okay with the Environment Court ruling of at least 50 metres on average of this easement. That was done non-notified by council staff. The erection of a bridge over Te Arai Stream across Lynn's land, the stream, and across dock land. That has been approved non-notified by council staff in the reserve. The approaches are in the reserve. All non-notified. It's a 30-metre long concrete vehicular bridge in an area of quite substantial and significant environmental concern. There's the allowance for the unlawful construction of a dam across the same stream and rock walls in the reserve by the private developer. No. This directly impacts...
Hang on, order please. It's unfair to the people actually presenting. Aaron, back to you.
Thank you. This directly impacts the ecology of the stream, endangering bird life, endangered bird life, and the farming economy adjacent to the stream and the catchment area. There's also a retrospective consent that's been applied for to council, non-notified, for the slight reduction in this dam, and to justify all the riprap walls that were put in. Previously, this was just a floodplain. There was a very, very, very small ford that was put in previously by originally forestry and then sort of maintained by local farmers. That was awash at high tide, had no ecological impact. That has now been upgraded, shall we say, by private developers in a public reserve to a 1.2 metre high dam, reinforced by large rocks, boulders, because of ongoing flooding and issues. The only reason the flooding issues are occurring is because of this dam. There was never an issue there before. The developers have caused this problem in a public reserve, and council staff have allowed to do it non-notified, or in cases with the dam itself, completely illegal. There is no resource consent for it, but they're allowing a non-notified retrospective consent to legally create it. And this has occurred over the last 2 years, or 3 years. And then there's also the allowance of buildings of dwellings in the adjacent private land that can be clearly seen from the beach, and this is in direct contradiction to the PC 166, the creation of the private plan change in the Environment Court ruling 2014, and also adopted by the Auckland Unitary Plan. They're not allowed to be seen from the beach, yet there's clearly at the moment 2 can be seen from the beach, and there's only about 4 being built, and there's another 47 to be built. What's going to happen now? This is all non-notified by council staff. Councils, you need to step in on this. You need to deal with this. This is private, this is public land. There should have been public consultative process right back at the start, or nothing being done in the reserve until that happens. As you can see by this list, and this isn't an exhaustive list, this is just what we're coming to today. Lots have been done. Large irreparable damage has been done to this reserve and has predefined areas of this reserve for use by a private developer. Building a large vehicular concrete bridge across the stream. The public don't need it. There's vehicular access into both parts of the reserve that are opposite, so adjacent to the stream. You can get to it by vehicle. There's no need, there's no operational need. Parks operations have said, we don't need it. It's not, that wasn't their call. They didn't ask for it. The local equestrian crew don't need it. They can ford the stream. It's not a problem. It's only a very, very small stream. There is absolutely no real necessity for it besides whatever the private developer wants. The question is why do council roll over on it? Why do council allow all of these things to happen? Why do council continually allowing this to happen, and then hopefully, you know, in their eyes, possibly trying to justify it through a management plan that is trying to encapsulate all these previous works? I find that abhorrent. The removal of 58,000 cubic metres of sand created a wetland area. What it's done is created a moat between the private land and the public land. That's what it's done. It's reduced the area of recreational land by forcing this moat in between the foredunes and the private land, and therefore creating less recreational area if it was to be deemed recreation by a publicly notified management plan, and caused and created an impact which forces people south towards the stream mouth, which Heather will elaborate on, is the nesting ground for the endangered New Zealand fairy tern. This was all defined in the Environment Court ruling to stop these things from happening, to stop this human impact on this beautiful area. It's 10 kilometres long beach. There's 2 public access points to it. Te Arai Regional Point, which is a regional park right now, has a road right to it. The next is Pacific Road, which is this easement we're talking about. It's currently a public easement over private land. The opportunity here by staff, and as in the submissions, is to, in the back of the submissions, is approve public notification of its intent to vary the Regional Park Management Plan by establishing a management plan for the land held for council by regional reserve purposes at and surrounding Te Arai Point, as shown in the attachments A, B and C of the future presentation by council staff, together with the land to be so vested following subdivision and formal survey of the land shown in attachment C.
Yeah.
Such notification is to include an invitation to submit suggestions for the content of such a plan, including the classification of such reserves under the Reserves Act and Management Plan under the Act. After the hearings and consideration shall generally follow the table and timeline set out in paragraph 19 in the report. Once the classification of the reserve is established, initiate steps to alter the zoning of the total reserve under the Auckland Unitary Plan as open space, with such definitions of that zone as are appropriate for each classification. Direct staff to investigate the vesting of Pacific Road. I submitted over a 6,000 signature petition in February this year requesting that Pacific Road be vested as a public road. 6,000 members of the public signed that, over 6,000, 6,174. There's only 3,000 people in Mangawhai, the closest town. That says something about the importance of this area. Yet nothing has been done. There's been no conversation had with Auckland Transport. There's been no conversation in council. There's been no conversation to us. Absolutely nothing's been done. So direct staff to investigate the vesting of Pacific Road as in terms of the Environment Court decision, establishing the new reserve, and to report to this committee as soon as possible. Direct staff to investigate the conclusion of an arrangement with DOC to enable council to manage DOC-owned land in the vicinity as an integral part of the reserve, and report to this committee. It's important that any decision made in any management plan that is created with DOC is done with you guys, the councillors. Sorry, I shouldn't say guys, that's sexist, I apologise. Is with the councillors. There was a co-management agreement created with Parks and Tannel, the private developers, that has been in complete prejudice to the public the entire time, and has been mishandled and mismanaged the entire time that it was available. And now we hope that with councillors' input and guidance, that such an agreement with DOC isn't also has future issues. And if feasible, approve the whole reserve being protected in perpetuity by order in council in terms of section 139 of the Local Government Act 2012. That's feasible. We would appreciate that. I'd just like to throw it to Heather and Colin just very briefly about the dam issue and about the environmental and community impacts. What you guys deal with. Heather, please.
You do. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you, and it's very appropriate because, as I'm sure you're all aware, it's Conservation Week, and we are dealing with the rarest endemic breeding bird in New Zealand, which has between 35 and 40 individual birds. So it's extremely endangered. It is the most nationally critically endangered bird in New Zealand, and it's their environment that we're trying to protect. It is their environment that is being damaged by the illegal structure that's been allowed to be put up in the TRI park that we're talking about. And so we have written letters, we have engaged with council staff who, to their credit, have issued abatement notices to the developers to remove this. They've had 2 abatement notices, but each time they've managed to say, oh, well, we'll put in a retrospective resource consent. Each retrospective resource consent has been found wanting, but it's still there in abeyance. And in the meantime, and this has been going on for a year, this dam at its height has been in place for a year. I came to a meeting of this committee just over a year ago and I'd written a letter which outlined our concerns. It's still there. I've got various documents which I'll table, which outline the position. The danger to fairy terns, you say, well, what is the danger to fairy terns? There are only 5 breeding sites left for these birds. One of them is at the mouth of TRI Stream. Fairy tern live only on fish. They only eat small fish. They don't have any other food source. So the fish in TRI Stream are of absolute paramount importance for them, because not only the birds, there's one pair that breeds at TRI Stream mouth, but other birds that breed in the Mangawhai Wildlife Refuge, which is just to the north, also come to TRI Stream mouth to breed. What this dam has done is it's stopped the whitebait from migrating up the stream so that they can spawn further up. So that current populations of whitebait are being devastated, thank you, and future populations are probably more at risk. So that is why we have been so concerned about this dam. That's why we're coming to you today to ask you please to direct staff to actually enforce their abatement orders. They have issued them, but they've been sort of persuaded, oh no, we should allow the developers to have another go at their consent. Now, my concern then, as convener with the Fairy Tern Trust, is to protect the fairy tern as much as possible. And it is our rarest endangered bird. We really do need to protect it. So that's my brief.
Thank you. So
There are other concerns too for community. This dam is not only affecting the fairy tern, it's affecting other birds, and it doesn't really affect the dotterels so much. It could do, long term, it could have effect on the dotterels that also breed at Te Arai stream mouth.
thanks, Heather. We just do need to
That's fine.
focus.
Okay. I'll hand over the
What-
other effects, and Colin.
If we can do
will
it
talk.
very, very quickly, because I am aware, and we've just been having a look, there is considerable correspondence around this issue. I know Ian
Yes.
Smallburn is dealing with it. So where the confusion was, we've got some of this pertains to the reserve, some of this pertains to regulatory, and what we're trying to do is just work out what a practical thing is that we can do. And I think it's all got linked into one. Some will be dealt with through submissions, and some we just need to crack on with the regulatory side. So if I can hear from our local board
But I'd
member.
just say one thing. It was actually Ian Smallburn's letter in reply, which has actually raised our concerns to Red Alert, because he is saying in that letter that there are no plans to ensure that the dam is removed.
Okay.
Now,
So
we
that
had
we're now-
been dealing
sure.
with other
I hear
council
that.
members.
I hear that. I'm getting messages now. We do really need to move on. We've got a lot of people waiting and a huge agenda to get through, and we're not even out of public forum yet. We've got our chair of regulatory who's here and who's listening to this, and your local councillor who I think needs to oversee the complexity of this and help us through what appears to be quite a confusing three-way process. So we'll just hear from the local board and then we'll move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, councillors, for having me come along today. I am here to look after not only Heather's fairy terns, but my people. And my part of this is that the Auckland Council has deleted all the drainage boards out of the area, and we're the only ones in New Zealand now that don't have any drainage boards. And what that's done is, with this development at Mangwai, has allowed them to build this dam up, as Heather's just said. But not only that, it has impacted on our rural community financially and socially, and it's destroying their blimmin' incomes. Now, what's happened is Stan Semenoff, Mayor from Whangarei, rang me last week, because what happened is he has an obligation to the community to look after sediment control in his sand mine. It's now delivering thousands of tonnes of sand for your development and what have you, and it's flooding that out, and all the sediment's starting to hose out onto the beach. Now, my part of this is that I have to draw it to your attention that Auckland Council needs to look at our rural area in a different situation that we've got at present, because I have 3 catchment areas and I have $26,000 to deal with, and I've spent that in 1 week. Now, we're looking at thousands of dollars of deferred maintenance come from the Rodney District Council. We knew that why that was. I also got information last week that a lot of the contribution that's been going in by the sand mine there into Auckland Council has not been going to Auckland Transport for our roading. It's been going to in cash or lieu or in some other account. Now, that's what happened when we had this thing called Progens in Rodney, and those crooks are now in jail. Now, what happens here with me is I have to protect my community. I need those drainage boards to be reinstated because we don't have any vehicle to raise any money to look after our area. Our neighbours in Kaipara raised $383,000 for their account to look after theirs. So my plea to you is to get rid of that dam, or otherwise I am sick and tired of what's going on with the council, and I will step in and have that removed, and then we'll have to suffer the consequences. Thank you.
Right. Okay, we've probably got time for one question. Councillor Walker.
Sure. I've got a question, and part of the answer to that question I'd like to hear from you, Colin. So the context is I've been up there with Councillor Watson and Councillor Sayers. So I've seen the removal of the sand, I've seen the dam, I've seen that fish ladder, which is frankly pathetic, absolutely pathetic. So the question I'm asking, Colin, how long would it take to eliminate that dam and put things back? What sort of cost might we be looking at, and how quickly could it happen, and what sort of support would that have from your community, Aaron?
Absolutely easy. Have major support for the community because it would put it all back to where it was, and our community would then start to it. And that particular area is very sensitive. It's under peat, and if you take the water out of the peat, they can't grow any grass or maintain their income. If you keep it flooded, it's going to drown everything that's in the area. So it's a very, very sensitive catchment. And the second thing is that you said it would take a day to remove it, and it probably, I don't know, maybe $2,500, $3,000 will be fixed.
Okay. I think we're, councillors and members, we're now having a discussion about something that we don't have information
It's
on.
an
in front of
urgent
us.
matter,
So
Madam
just-
Chair.
If you need a hand, give us
Actually,
a
can
shout, I'll
we-
be up there.
Sorry,
I'd
this
happy
is
to.
becoming
I'd go
a
up there.
very... I don't want this meeting to become farcical. We've got some really important and critical issues to deal with here.
As is
Can
this.
we actually... Exactly. Can we just take this seriously, please? So I'm going to
Well,
ask
through you,
our-
Madam Chair,
Yeah, just hang on,
The
Councillor.
plight of the New
Just-
Zealand ferry turn
Exactly.
is serious.
Well, that's the point I'm making, councillor. Can we all just take a deep breath and settle down? We've got a long day ahead of us. I'm going to ask Councillor Sayers, as the local councillor for this area, this does sound like a critical issue. It hasn't been brought directly to our attention, which I'm surprised about, but I think for the local board and the local councillor to deal with this, it is a regulatory issue in the first instance. I think we need to work with our enforcement through regulatory, and secondly, it would be really good to hear what the plan to deal with this is. So I will leave this in your capable hands. It sounds like it's urgent, and I think on behalf of this committee, we appreciate that some action needs to happen.
Thank you,
So-
Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, I really appreciate that.
Okay. Also, we just, again, as I said at the beginning, in discussions with our staff, we need to just separate out what are the actions we need to take now to support the board and the local community, which bits will be picked up during the submission process and the public process, and which bits do we need to join with you to talk to Auckland Transport about. And we're happy to work with our local councillor to support the board in that.
Madam Chair, could I ask you one thing? Would it be a good idea for the people here to put a deputation to the Rodney board?
It would be an excellent idea. I mean, in the first instance, the local board should be all over this and, you know, giving that guidance in the on the wider policy issues and the regulatory issues to council. That's how it's meant to work. So I hope that that will happen with urgency, and again, that your councillor will push that. So I know we've got...
I can make a vote of thanks if you like.
Well, we're not
through
quite
the
there
chair.
yet.
Okay.
Member Wilcox.
No, I think you've kind of answered my question. I wanted to understand, is this a compliance issue we're
Aye.
actually dealing with?
Uh,
So
correct.
so it'll come before regulatory?
Indeed.
Okay.
Indeed. It just seems to have had to go around the houses to find the right place.
There is, in my submission that we emailed yesterday, those directly relate to the report that's happening today. And some of those, and the issues that we have precede that report and the adoption of a publicly notified management plan. That's why it's here today.
Yeah.
That's why it's important that all councillors know about this, because I'm assuming you don't get the information, or I know you're busy people and you get a lot of information. So here is the information, here are the facts, here's the impact on the environment, here's the impact on the community.
Okay. So, Councillor Sayers, you wish to move the thank you to the team?
I'd like to thank them
Give you a
very much
second.
for coming along and making all the councillors aware. I'll also, and when appropriate, invite you back again to give us an update.
Thank you.
I'll
you.
put the recommendation. All those in
Aye.
favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much, and thank you for your time today.
And that my submission be
So
tabled,
finally,
please?
yep, no, it is. And finally, I've been very relaxed about the clapping. There has been a lot of clapping, but if we can just keep it down a wee bit. I would just like to finally invite Saffron Toms to speak to the item on Glengarry Road. Thanks, Saffron.
Kia ora tātou, and thank you, Madam Chair.
5 minutes, Saffron.
5 minutes? Okay, I've been waiting for 2 hours, and this is a very important thing, and so if possible, I've got quite a lot to say, and so I'm initially here to speak about the motion to revoke reserve status of 315A Glengarry Road in Gleneden. And we understand, as a local board, I'm speaking on behalf of the local board, I'm the Deputy Chair of Waitakere Ranges Local Board. I understand that this revocation of reserve status is essential for the disposal of the park. A really key piece of information for your consideration, councillors, is that the local board has not actually had sufficient opportunity to be involved in the decision making to sell this park. Early on, we had a workshop when it was tabled to dispose of this. We went and we visited the park. It's a very beautiful piece of land, and we've since discovered that it actually even has a bigger road frontage than we first thought, and it's important for a number of reasons. We had late acknowledgement from officers for our feedback against the sale of it, and I think that I'm not even sure whether you yourselves were provided with that feedback from the local board about how important that park was for our local area. Gleneden, by our council's own research and analysis, is under-parked. It is an area that already does not have enough parks to serve its current population, and with the unitary plan and with legacy planning decisions that were done under legacy plans, we are looking at huge intensification. Despite us looking at, facing a lot of intensification in our area, because it's not done under the unitary plan and because we don't have any unitary plan, what are they called, the spatial areas, we are not receiving any growth funding whatsoever. So we are, and our local discretionary initiative funding calculation means that we are very, very underfunded compared to all other boards, because the calculation is on population, 90%, deprivation, 5%, and land area, 5%. And as you well know, 80% of the Waitakere Ranges Local Board area is forested, so we have a low population base. However, in the Gleneden area, it is a high population. By our own records, shows we are already underparked, severely underparked, and to my knowledge, we have at least 3 large new apartment buildings scheduled in the next little while, completely consented, and at least 2 of them already underway to be built. Those 2 are 10-storey apartments. Nearby to this particular park is Pars Park. It's a large park, but it is already highly contested by sports fields. There's a table tennis club, there's a marae and kura there, and also a pool. So the remainder of that park is a natural area which is in the hinterland, and it is not well surveilled by neighbouring properties or by road, and it has no road frontage. This particular park has road frontage, so it means that it's ideal to put into community gardens or be a place for kids to go, and even the shape of it, as Councillor Walker observed when councillors were considering the disposal, the shape of it actually lends itself beautifully to be a greenways into the future. As we all know, the prices in Auckland City are huge for land, and it is nigh on impossible and definitely not a trend for council to be buying new parks. So we really need to hold on to what we've got, particularly in an area where we are deprived of parks. The local board has partnered with Unitec recently to do research on what the effects of the change in Gleneden are going to be for the area. We're going to see gentrification, and we're going to see the opposite as well. And one of the also the wonderful things about this park is that it actually serves a very, very diverse population, ethnically diverse, socially diverse, and people that are both owners of their homes and quite affluent, and more transient populations of renters. It is essential for building good and strong communities for people to have places to naturally come together, and parks are really important parts of that. Additional to this, the park neighbours onto Nola's, which is an orchard, one of the few remnants of the Gleneden Oratia area's rich heritage of agriculture, and also Silax is very close to Silax. It has also a huge potential in that sense, and the shape of it, it has huge potential to be a farmer's market, because our current farmers market, which is hugely successful at artisan wineries, is on private land, so we're not sure of the future. So it's our job really to look into the future and make sure that we can provide for people. I think I've actually covered everything, but so I just want to say, please, councillors, please consider this afresh. I know that you've already made a decision, and I'm not sure that it doesn't feel fair to come in and to be able to talk to you already when the decision is already made to dispose of this product of this park. So please consider this with fresh eyes. This is our consideration. This is our viewpoint from the local board. We are the landowner. We should have been involved earlier on in this decision-making process. So please consider with fresh eyes, and for our communities, please vote to not revoke the reserve status when the motion comes up.
Thanks so much. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, just a question I might direct to the officers, Madam Chair, and I'm looking for a way forward on this based on, what I've heard.
Shall we wait for the item? So we're going to discuss this at the item, which will be really good.
All right.
Okay, I'll move that. I'll move, and Councillor Cooper will second that. We thank Saffron for the presentation. Thank you, Saffron. Put that. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you very much. So just to let people know where we've got to, we've got some more people who are going to input on other items, but these will be with the items. So we're going to have public input on our water quality item for the Central Isthmus, and I think board input into the confidential part of the agenda. That's pretty much it. Yep. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. So we'll move on to, and I'm terribly, terribly sorry, we've had the Ethnic Peoples panel and the Youth